When I walked into Grandpa's empty living room that October evening, decorated balloons hanging sadly from the ceiling and an untouched birthday cake sitting alone on the table, I never imagined this moment would spark the most devastating family war in our history. My parents, my two brothers, and my sister had all chosen to attend my cousin's trendy new bar opening instead of celebrating our 85-year-old grandfather's birthday. He sat there in his wheelchair wearing his best suit, waiting for a family that never came. That night, everything I believed about family loyalty died and my quest for justice began. Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate revenge, I want to know where you are watching from tonight. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story hits you in the heart like it did me, please smash that like button and subscribe because what happens next will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you do not want to miss how this family drama unfolds and how karma comes back with a vengeance. My name is Serafina, but everyone calls me Sarah. Growing up in our tight-knit Italian-American family in Boston, I always believed blood was thicker than water. That belief shattered completely on October 15th when I discovered the truth behind my family's absence. Grandpa Tony had been battling lung cancer for 8 months. The doctors gave him 6 months to live, but he was fighting with everything he had. When he mentioned wanting a small birthday celebration, I immediately started planning. I called my parents, my brothers Marco and Vincent, and my sister Isabella. Everyone enthusiastically agreed to come. The morning of his birthday, the excuses started rolling in. Mom called first, claiming she had a migraine. Dad texted saying his back was acting up. Marco said his girlfriend had a family emergency. Vincent claimed he had to work late. Isabella said her baby was sick. One by one, they all bailed, leaving me as the only family member who showed up. I spent 4 hours at Grandpa's house watching him try to hide his heartbreak. He kept checking his watch, asking if maybe the others were running late. I made excuse after excuse for them, but inside I was furious. When I finally left that night, promising to visit again soon, I had no idea how deep this betrayal actually ran. 3 days later, Isabella accidentally posted a photo on social media that changed everything. There they were, all of them, at Cousin Danny's bar opening. My parents, both brothers and Isabella, all dressed up and smiling, toasting with expensive cocktails. The timestamp showed they were there during Grandpa's birthday party. They had not just forgotten or had emergencies. They had actively chosen to attend a bar opening over their dying patriarch's birthday celebration. But that was not the worst part. When I scrolled through more photos, I discovered something that made my blood boil. Danny's new bar was partially funded by our family trust, money that was supposed to be distributed equally among all grandchildren when Grandpa passed away. Money that was being used to fund a business venture that none of us knew about, except apparently my parents and siblings. I started digging deeper. Phone calls to cousins revealed that this bar opening was planned weeks in advance. Everyone knew about it. Everyone chose it over Grandpa Tony. But more disturbing was what I learned about the family trust. My parents had been manipulating Grandpa into changing his will, convincing him that I was too irresponsible to handle an inheritance. They had been feeding him lies about my supposed financial troubles and reckless spending habits. The truth hit me like a freight train. While I had been working 2 jobs to pay for nursing school, visiting Grandpa every week, helping with his medical appointments, and being his primary emotional support, my family had been systematically turning him against me behind my back. They painted me as the black sheep while positioning themselves as the responsible ones who deserved the larger inheritance. I found out about their weekly family dinners I was never invited to, where they would sit around my parents' kitchen table discussing Grandpa's declining health and how to best position themselves for when he passed. They talked about my supposed character flaws, my financial instability, and why I should receive a smaller portion of the inheritance. All while I was at the hospital with Grandpa during his chemotherapy sessions, holding his hand and telling him everything would be okay. The final straw came when I discovered they had convinced Grandpa to put the family house up for sale. The house where he had lived for 50 years, where my grandmother had died, where every major family celebration had taken place. They told him he could not manage it anymore and that the money from the sale should go toward Danny's business ventures and my siblings' mortgages. Meanwhile, I had been offering to move in with Grandpa to help care for him, an offer that my parents had somehow convinced him to refuse. As I sat in my tiny apartment that night, surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal, I realized this was not just about missing a birthday party. This was about systematic manipulation, financial fraud, and emotional abuse of an elderly man who trusted them completely. They had weaponized his love for them against both him and me. But what they did not know was that I had been Grandpa's favorite long before his illness. When I was 16 and going through a rebellious phase, he was the one who sat me down and taught me about family values, hard work, and integrity. When I decided to become a nurse, he was the one who encouraged me and helped me apply for scholarships. He had always seen something special in me that my parents seemed to miss. More importantly, they had no idea that Grandpa had been keeping detailed records of every conversation, every visit, and every financial transaction related to his estate. He was sharper than they gave him credit for, and their betrayal had not gone unnoticed. The next morning, I drove straight to Grandpa's house with a plan that would expose my family's true nature once and for all. I found him sitting in his garden, feeding the birds he loved so much. His eyes lit up when he saw me, the same way they always had since I was a little girl. "Sarah, sweetheart, you didn't have to come check on me so soon," he said, but I could see the loneliness in his eyes. The birthday debacle had hurt him more than he was willing to admit. "Grandpa, we need to talk," I said, sitting down next to him on the old wooden bench my grandmother had loved. "I know what's been going on." What happened next surprised me. Instead of confusion or denial, Grandpa Tony smiled sadly and nodded. "I was wondering when you would figure it out. You always were the smartest one in the family." He had known. This entire time he had known about their manipulation, their lies about me, and their plans for his estate. He had been testing them, and they had failed spectacularly. "I've been documenting everything for months," he told me, pulling out a leather journal from his jacket pocket. "Every lie they told about you, every attempt to manipulate me into changing my will, every family gathering they excluded you from. I wanted to see how far they would go." Together, we went through his meticulous records. Phone conversations where my mother had claimed I was asking him for money, something I had never done. Text messages from my brothers suggesting I was only visiting him because I wanted inheritance money. Emails from Isabella claiming I had badmouthed them to other family members. All lies, all documented, all with dates and times. But the most damning evidence was a recorded phone conversation from 2 weeks before his birthday. My father had called Grandpa explaining that the whole family would be attending Danny's bar opening and suggesting that maybe they should postpone the birthday celebration. When Grandpa had insisted on keeping the original date, my father had actually tried to talk him out of it, claiming that a bar opening was more important for the family's business interests. "They chose money over love," Grandpa said quietly, "and they tried to make me choose it too." The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed more than just documentation. I needed witnesses, public accountability, and consequences that would stick. Grandpa and I devised a plan that would expose their behavior in the most effective way possible. First, we contacted Grandpa's lawyer, Maria Rodriguez, who had been handling the family trust for 20 years. When we showed her the evidence of manipulation and the attempts to influence Grandpa's will under false pretenses, she was furious. She explained that what my family had been doing could constitute elder abuse and fraud, especially since they were lying about my character and financial situation to influence his decisions. Maria helped us prepare a legal response that would protect Grandpa's assets and expose the truth about my family's behavior. We also set up a meeting with the bank manager who handled the family trust, presenting evidence that the money being used for Danny's bar had been obtained through deception. But the real masterstroke came when Grandpa suggested we plan a family gathering, ostensibly to clear the air about the missed birthday celebration. He would invite everyone over for Sunday dinner, claiming he wanted to discuss his estate plans and make sure everyone was happy with his decisions. "Let them come thinking they are getting what they want," he said with a glint in his eye that reminded me of the sharp businessman he had been before retirement. "Then we will show them exactly what their choices have earned them." The dinner was scheduled for the following Sunday. I spent the week gathering additional evidence, including screenshots of the social media posts from the bar opening bank records showing the unauthorized use of trust funds and testimonies from cousins who had witnessed my family's discussions about manipulating Grandpa's will. I also reached out to my Aunt Caroline, Grandpa's youngest daughter, who lived in California. She had been kept out of most family drama due to distance, but when I explained what had been happening, she was horrified. She agreed to fly in for the dinner, bringing her own evidence of how my parents had been trash-talking me to the extended family. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change our family forever, but what I did not expect was how my family would react when cornered, or how far they would go to protect their lies. I thought I understood the depth of their betrayal, but I was about to learn that what I had discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. Sunday morning arrived, and as I prepared for what would become the most important family dinner of my life, I had no idea that my family had been preparing their own counterattack. They had spent the week crafting their own narrative, building their own case against me, and preparing to turn Grandpa against me once and for all. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated both my grandfather's wisdom and my determination to protect him. They thought they were walking into a dinner where they would convince an old man to cut me out of his life completely. Instead, they were walking into their own exposure where every lie would be revealed and every manipulation would be brought into the light. Sunday afternoon arrived with an unseasonable warmth that felt almost ominous. I spent the morning at Grandpa's house helping him prepare for what we both knew would be the most dramatic family dinner in our history. As we set the table with my grandmother's finest china, I could see the determination in his eyes, mixed with a sadness that broke my heart. "You know, Sarah," he said as we arranged the silverware, "your grandmother always said that family is not about blood, it is about who shows up when it matters. Today, we find out who our real family is." At exactly 2 o'clock, they began arriving. My parents came first, bearing expensive wine and fake smiles. Mom immediately started fussing over Grandpa, asking about his health and medications in a voice dripping with artificial concern. Dad shook his hand firmly, making a show of being the dutiful son. Marco and Vincent arrived together, both looking uncomfortable but trying to hide it. They had always been followers rather than leaders in family dynamics, and I could tell they were nervous about whatever my parents had planned. Isabella came last, her baby in tow, using motherhood as both a shield and an excuse for her behavior. But the real surprise came when Aunt Caroline walked through the door. My parents' faces went white with shock. They had no idea I had contacted her, and her presence immediately shifted the power dynamic in the room. "Caroline," my mother stammered, "what a wonderful surprise. We had no idea you were coming to visit." "I bet you didn't," Caroline replied coolly, giving me a knowing look. She had flown in specifically for this confrontation, and her presence as Grandpa's daughter gave additional weight to whatever revelations were coming. Danny also arrived, which I had not expected. Apparently, my parents had invited him thinking his presence would reinforce their narrative about family business investments and my supposed exclusion from important decisions. What they did not know was that Caroline had already spoken with Danny during the week, and he was horrified to learn how his bar funding had been obtained. As we sat down for dinner, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was smiling and making small talk, but underneath the surface, battle lines had been drawn. Grandpa played his part perfectly, acting like the grateful patriarch surrounded by his loving family. "I want to thank everyone for coming," he began, raising his wine glass. "Family means everything to me, especially now. I have been thinking a lot lately about legacy, about what I want to leave behind, and about who I can really count on." My mother immediately jumped in. "Dad, you know you can count on all of us. We love you so much, and we want what is best for you." "Do you?" Grandpa asked quietly, and the room suddenly felt colder. That was my cue. I stood up, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "Before we talk about legacy, I think there are some things that need to be discussed. Some truths that need to come out." I started with the birthday party, pulling out printed screenshots from Isabella's social media posts. These photos were taken during Grandpa's birthday celebration, the celebration that all of you were supposedly too sick, too busy, or too overwhelmed to attend. Isabella's face flushed red. "Sarah, you don't understand. It was complicated. Danny's opening was important for the family's financial future. More important than spending time with your dying grandfather? Caroline asked sharply. More important than honoring a man who sacrificed everything for this family. But I was just getting started. I pulled out the bank records that Maria had helped me obtain, showing the transfers from the family trust to Danny's business account. Speaking of financial futures, let's talk about how Danny's bar was funded. Money from Grandpa's trust money that was supposed to be distributed equally among all grandchildren, money that was used without proper authorization. Danny looked mortified. I had no idea the money came from that source. Your parents told me it was from their personal savings. My father's face was turning purple with rage. Sarah, you have no right to go through private financial records. This is a family matter, and you are clearly trying to cause trouble where none exists. Am I? I asked, pulling out Grandpa's journal. Because according to this documentation kept meticulously by Grandpa himself, there has been a systematic campaign to manipulate him into changing his will based on lies about my character and financial situation. I read directly from the journal, sharing specific instances where my family had lied about me asking for money, about my supposed irresponsible behavior, about my alleged disrespect for family values. With each revelation, my family looked more cornered and more desperate. But then, my mother played her trump card. She stood up dramatically, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, sweetheart, you are clearly under a lot of stress. We have all been worried about you. This paranoid behavior, these accusations, this obsession with money and inheritance, it is not healthy. We love you, but you need help. She turned to Grandpa with practiced concern. Dad, we didn't want to burden you with this, but Sarah has been struggling financially and emotionally. She has been asking other family members for loans, making wild accusations about all of us, and clearly fixating on your estate in an unhealthy way. We think she might be having some kind of breakdown. It was a masterful performance, designed to make me look unstable and manipulative while positioning themselves as the concerned, responsible family members. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker in Grandpa's eyes, and my heart sank. But then Aunt Caroline stood up. That is interesting, because according to my conversations with several family members this week, Sarah has never asked anyone for money. In fact, multiple cousins mentioned how impressed they were that she was working her way through nursing school without family help. Caroline pulled out her own phone, showing text messages and emails. I have documentation here showing that it was actually you, my dear sister-in-law, who has been spreading lies about Sarah to the extended family, claiming she was disrespectful, money-hungry, and unreliable. Lies that were contradicted by everyone who actually spends time with her. The room erupted into chaos. My brothers tried to defend our parents while simultaneously distancing themselves from the worst accusations. Isabella was crying, claiming she was just following everyone else's lead. Danny was demanding explanations about the money that funded his bar. But the most devastating moment came when Grandpa slowly stood up using his walker for support. The room fell silent as he looked around the table at each family member. Enough, he said quietly, but his voice carried absolute authority. Sarah, show them the recording. My mother went pale. What recording? I pulled out my phone and played the audio recording that Grandpa had made 2 weeks before his birthday. My father's voice was clear as day, trying to convince Grandpa to skip his birthday celebration in favor of the bar opening, arguing that business networking was more important than sentimental celebrations. There are more recordings, Grandpa said calmly. Months of them. Every phone call where you tried to turn me against Sarah, every lie you told about her character, every attempt to manipulate me into changing my will. I documented it all because I wanted to see how far you would go. My father stood up his chair, falling backward. This is entrapment, you tricked us. I trusted you, Grandpa replied simply. And you betrayed that trust repeatedly. While Sarah was here helping me with medical appointments, holding my hand during chemotherapy, and being my emotional support, you were plotting behind both our backs. But my family was not done fighting. As the evening progressed, they became increasingly desperate and vicious. My mother accused me of elder abuse, claiming I was manipulating Grandpa for financial gain. My brother suggested I had coached him into making the recordings. Isabella claimed the whole thing was a setup designed to steal her children's inheritance. Their accusations became so wild and vindictive that even Danny started backing away from them, clearly uncomfortable with the level of venom being directed at me. But their desperate attacks only served to prove exactly what Grandpa and I had been saying all along. When cornered, they showed their true nature. As the dinner devolved into screaming and accusations, I realized that exposing the truth was only the beginning. My family was not going to accept responsibility or apologize. They were going to fight dirty, and they were going to try to destroy me completely rather than admit their wrongdoing. But what they did not know was that Aunt Caroline and I had prepared for this reaction. We had allies they were not aware of, evidence they had not seen, and legal protections they had not considered. The real war was just beginning, and they had just shown us exactly how ruthless they were willing to be. That night, as I drove home through the quiet Boston streets, I knew there was no going back. The family I had grown up believing in was gone forever, but maybe, just maybe, I could build something better from the ashes. The week following the explosive Sunday dinner, I thought I had won the first major battle. Grandpa was more determined than ever to protect his estate from my manipulative family. Aunt Caroline was providing crucial support from within the family structure, and even Danny was cooperating with our efforts to trace the misused trust funds. But I was about to learn that victory can be more dangerous than defeat, especially when it makes you trust the wrong people. The betrayal came from the person I least expected, Maria Rodriguez Grandpa's longtime lawyer, the woman who had helped us prepare our legal case, who had expressed outrage at my family's manipulation, who had promised to protect Grandpa's interests above all else. It started with small things that I initially dismissed, phone calls that went straight to voicemail when I tried to reach her, delayed responses to urgent emails about protecting Grandpa's assets, meetings that got mysteriously rescheduled at the last minute. I attributed it to her busy schedule and the complexity of elder law cases. The truth hit me like a sledgehammer on Thursday morning when I stopped by her office unannounced to drop off additional documentation we had gathered. Through her partially open door, I heard her voice clearly as she spoke on the phone. "Yes, I understand your concerns about your father's mental state," she was saying. "These accusations from Sarah are quite serious, and if Tony is being unduly influenced by her, we need to consider all legal options to protect him." My blood ran cold as I realized she was talking to my mother. The lawyer who was supposed to be protecting Grandpa from my family's manipulation was secretly strategizing with them behind our backs. I quietly pulled out my phone and started recording as Maria continued the conversation. The recordings Tony made could be problematic, but there are ways to challenge their admissibility. We could argue that Sarah coached him that his medications are affecting his judgment, or that she is taking advantage of his grief over his wife's death. My hands were shaking as I listened to this woman who had looked me in the eye just days earlier and promised to fight for justice, now planning how to destroy the case we had built together. She was discussing strategies to have Grandpa declared mentally incompetent, ways to invalidate his documented evidence, and methods to turn the entire situation around to make me look like the manipulator. "The key is to act quickly," Maria continued. "If we can establish a pattern of Sarah's undue influence and get a competency evaluation ordered, we can freeze all estate decisions and potentially reverse any recent changes to his will." I had heard enough. I quietly backed away from her office and drove straight to Grandpa's house, my mind reeling from this devastating betrayal. The one person we had trusted to protect us legally was actively working against us, and she had access to all our strategies, all our evidence, and all our plans. When I arrived at Grandpa's house, I found him in his study looking through old photo albums. The sight of him so vulnerable and trusting made my heart break. How was I going to tell him that the woman he had trusted for 20 years was betraying him? "Grandpa, we have a serious problem," I said, sitting down next to him and showing him the recording I had just made. As he listened to Maria's voice discussing ways to challenge his mental competency and invalidate his evidence, I watched his face transform from confusion to hurt to a cold anger I had never seen before. 20 years, he said quietly when the recording ended. 20 years I trusted that woman with my most important legal matters. Your grandmother's will, the trust set up business contracts. And this is how she repays that loyalty. But the betrayal went even deeper than we initially realized. When we started examining the timing of Maria's actions, we discovered that she had been feeding information to my family for weeks, possibly months. Every strategy we discussed with her had somehow found its way back to my parents, allowing them to stay one step ahead of our efforts. The emergency family meeting that my parents had called for the following day suddenly made sense. They knew exactly what evidence we had, exactly what legal strategies we were planning, and exactly how to counter every move we made. Maria had given them a complete roadmap to defeat us. But the worst part was discovering that Maria had already filed preliminary paperwork questioning Grandpa's mental competency. She had used her position as his trusted attorney to begin legal proceedings that could strip him of his right to make decisions about his own estate. The woman who was supposed to protect him was actively trying to have him declared mentally unfit. The betrayal was so complete and so devastating that for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt truly defeated. We had lost our legal advocate. Our strategies were compromised, and my family now had the advantage of knowing exactly how we planned to fight them. Grandpa was silent for a long time after we finished reviewing the full scope of Maria's betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. "Maybe they are right," he said quietly. "Maybe I am just a confused old man who cannot see clearly anymore. Maybe, Sarah, you should just take whatever you can get and walk away from this family before they destroy you too." Seeing my grandfather, this strong man who had built a successful business and raised a large family, reduced to questioning his own judgment, broke something inside me. My family had not just stolen money or manipulated legal documents. They had systematically destroyed the confidence and dignity of a man who deserved nothing but love and respect in his final years. That night, as I sat in my apartment wondering how we could possibly recover from this setback, I realized that my family's corruption ran deeper than I had ever imagined. They had not just manipulated Grandpa and excluded me from family decisions. They had built an entire network of allies and enablers who were willing to help them destroy anyone who threatened their plans. Maria's betrayal had given them everything they needed to paint me as the villain in this story. They now had legal documentation questioning Grandpa's mental state professional testimony about my supposed undue influence, and a narrative that positioned them as the concerned family members trying to protect a vulnerable elderly man from his manipulative granddaughter. I was facing the very real possibility that they might succeed in having Grandpa declared incompetent, that all his carefully documented evidence would be dismissed, and that I would be permanently cut out of both his life and his estate. The people I was fighting had more resources, more connections, and more ruthless determination than I had realized. But as I sat there in the darkness feeling more alone and defeated than I had ever felt in my life, I remembered something Grandpa had taught me when I was 16 and going through my rebellious phase. "Sarah," he had said, "when people show you who they really are, believe them. But more importantly, when life shows you what you are really made of, rise to meet it." Tomorrow I would find out exactly what I was made of. Friday morning brought an unexpected phone call that would completely change the trajectory of our fight. The voice on the other end belonged to someone I had never spoken to before, but whose name I recognized from family stories, Detective Michael Santos, a retired police investigator who had worked with Grandpa's construction company years ago on a fraud case involving a crooked contractor. "Miss Sarah," he said in a gruff but kindly voice, "your Aunt Caroline gave me your number. She thought you might need some help dealing with a family situation that has gotten out of hand." It turned out that Caroline had reached out to Detective Santos after our disastrous dinner, sharing her concerns about the manipulation and potential elder abuse happening to Grandpa. Santos, who remembered my grandfather as an honest businessman who had helped him solve several construction fraud cases, was appalled by what Caroline told him. "I have been investigating financial elder abuse cases for 30 years, he explained as we met at a small cafe near Grandpa's house. "What you are describing fits a textbook pattern of family members systematically isolating and manipulating an elderly victim for financial gain." But Detective Santos brought more than just moral support. He brought expertise in gathering evidence that would hold up in court contacts within the legal system, who could help us navigate Maria's betrayal, and most importantly, a complete understanding of how to build an unshakable case. "The first thing we need to do," he explained, "is document everything that has happened since Maria started working with your family behind your back. Every phone call, every meeting, every piece of paperwork she filed. We need to establish a clear timeline that shows how she violated her ethical duties to your grandfather." Santos had already started working. Through his contacts at the State Bar Association, he had discovered that Maria had been facing financial difficulties of her own. Her law practice was struggling. She had significant personal debts, and she had recently been passed over for a partnership at a larger firm. The money and connections my wealthy family could provide were apparently too tempting to resist. But more importantly, Santos revealed that Maria had made critical mistakes in her betrayal. In her eagerness to help my family, she had violated multiple legal ethics rules and potentially committed crimes that could not only destroy her career, but also invalidate everything she had done on their behalf. She breached attorney-client privilege when she shared your grandfather's confidential information with your parents, Santos explained. She created a conflict of interest by secretly representing opposing parties, and by filing competency paperwork based on information she obtained through privileged communications, she may have committed fraud. Working with Santos, we began building a case that went far beyond family drama. We were now documenting professional misconduct, potential criminal activity, and a conspiracy that involved multiple parties working together to defraud an elderly man. The evidence was overwhelming once we started looking at it through an investigator's lens. Bank records showed that my family had been systematically draining money from accounts they had access to, not just the trust fund used for Danny's bar. Medical records revealed that they had been interfering with Grandpa's healthcare decisions, sometimes contradicting his wishes or withholding information from his doctors. Most damning of all, Santos discovered that my family had been planning this manipulation for much longer than any of us realized. Through his investigation, he found emails and text messages going back over a year, showing that they had been discussing ways to limit my influence with Grandpa and maximize their own inheritance long before his cancer diagnosis. "This was not a series of bad decisions made under stress," Santos explained as we reviewed the evidence. "This was a calculated, long-term plan to isolate your grandfather from anyone who might interfere with their financial goals." But Santos's most brilliant move was setting up a sting operation that would catch Maria and my family in the act of their continued manipulation. Using his law enforcement contacts, he arranged for a retired judge named Judge Patricia Williams to pose as a potential guardian ad litem for Grandpa's case. Judge Williams, who had handled thousands of elder abuse cases during her career, agreed to meet with Maria and my parents to discuss their concerns about Grandpa's mental state. What they did not know was that Judge Williams was recording every conversation and documenting every attempt they made to manipulate the legal system. The meeting took place on Monday morning at Maria's office. Judge Williams played her role perfectly, acting like a sympathetic legal professional who was concerned about an elderly man being influenced by an unscrupulous granddaughter. My parents and Maria opened up completely, sharing strategies they had discussed for discrediting me, plans for controlling Grandpa's medical decisions, and even suggestions for how to minimize the legal consequences of their actions. "The recordings from that meeting are absolutely devastating," Santos told me afterward. "They discuss tactics that amount to conspiracy to commit elder abuse fraud and possibly even kidnapping if they follow through on their plan to move your grandfather to a facility against his will." But perhaps the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source, Danny himself. Racked with guilt over his unwitting participation in their scheme, he had been quietly documenting his own conversations with my family about the money used to fund his bar. Danny's recordings revealed that my parents had specifically told him the money came from their personal savings, not from Grandpa's trust. They had made him complicit in their fraud without his knowledge, and when he realized what had happened, he was horrified. "I never would have accepted that money if I knew where it really came from," he told Santos during a recorded interview. "They made me an accessory to stealing from your grandfather, and I want to make it right." Danny's cooperation was crucial because it established that my family had been deliberately deceptive about the source of the funds, proving intent to defraud rather than simple misunderstanding or poor communication. As our evidence mounted, Santos introduced me to Rebecca Chen. "Wait, that's against our rules." Let me correct that. Santos introduced me to Rebecca Martinez, an attorney who specialized in elder abuse cases and had a reputation for destroying corrupt lawyers who betrayed their clients. Rebecca was everything Maria was not: ethical, fierce, and completely dedicated to protecting vulnerable elderly clients from family predators. When Santos showed her our evidence, she immediately agreed to take the case and began preparing legal actions that would not only protect Grandpa, but also ensure that Maria and my family faced serious consequences for their actions. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder abuse I have ever seen, Rebecca told us during our first meeting. The documentation is extraordinary, the evidence is indisputable, and the pattern of manipulation is so obvious that any judge will see through their lies immediately. But Rebecca brought more than legal expertise. She brought connections to Adult Protective Services relationships with judges who specialized in elder abuse cases and experience with the criminal prosecutors who would eventually be handling charges against Maria and potentially my family members. We are not just going to stop their current manipulation, Rebecca explained. We are going to make sure they face criminal charges, that Maria loses her license to practice law, and that your grandfather gets justice for what they put him through. As we prepared for the legal battle ahead, I realized that my family had made a fatal error in their betrayal. By being so thorough in their manipulation, by documenting their plans so extensively, and by involving a corrupt lawyer who left a clear trail of evidence, they had handed us everything we needed to destroy them completely. The scared, isolated granddaughter they thought they were fighting no longer existed. In her place stood a woman backed by law enforcement expertise, legal firepower, and ironclad evidence that would expose their crimes to the world. My family thought they had won when they turned Maria against us. Instead, they had pushed us to build a case so powerful and so comprehensive that their destruction was now inevitable. The final confrontation came exactly 3 weeks after Detective Santos entered our lives, but it was nothing like the dramatic family dinner where this all began. Instead, justice was served in a sterile courthouse conference room where my family faced the full weight of their crimes under the fluorescent lights of the legal system. Rebecca Martinez had orchestrated the entire proceeding with surgical precision. Rather than allowing my family to continue their manipulation through prolonged court battles, she had arranged for a settlement conference where they would be confronted with all the evidence at once and given a choice: accept responsibility and face controlled consequences, or fight the charges and risk complete destruction. The room was packed with people my family had never expected to see. Detective Santos sat quietly in the corner, his presence alone enough to signal that this had moved beyond family drama into criminal territory. Judge Williams was there in her official capacity, ready to testify about the recorded conversations where my parents and Maria had discussed illegal strategies. Danny had flown in from New York, bringing additional financial records that proved the deliberate deception about his bar's funding. But the most devastating presence was that of Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the geriatric psychiatrist who had evaluated Grandpa the week before. Her report, which Rebecca read aloud in its entirety, was a complete vindication of his mental competency and a damning indictment of anyone who had suggested otherwise. Mr. Anthony Torres displays excellent cognitive function, clear understanding of his financial affairs, and no evidence of undue influence or manipulation, Dr. Walsh had written. His documentation of family interactions shows remarkable clarity and attention to detail. Any suggestion that he lacks the capacity to make informed decisions about his estate appears to be without medical foundation. My parents sat in stunned silence as Rebecca methodically presented evidence of their crimes: bank records showing unauthorized transfers, recorded conversations proving their lies about my character, documentation of their attempts to manipulate legal proceedings, medical records showing how they had interfered with Grandpa's healthcare decisions. But it was Maria who cracked first. Faced with evidence of her ethical violations and the very real possibility of criminal charges, she broke down completely and confessed everything. Her financial desperation, her agreement to help my family in exchange for legal fees and future business, her deliberate betrayal of her professional duties. "I never meant for it to go this far," she sobbed, though her tears carried no weight in that room. "I just needed the money, and they made it sound like Sarah was really manipulating him." Rebecca's response was ice cold and final. You chose to betray a client you had served for 20 years based on hearsay and financial incentive. The State Bar Association will be reviewing your license, and criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy are being filed today. My family's unity finally shattered completely under the pressure. Isabella broke first, claiming she had only followed my parents' lead and had never understood the full scope of their plans. My brothers quickly joined her, distancing themselves from the worst accusations and begging for leniency. But it was my father's final act of desperation that sealed their fate forever. Standing up suddenly, his face red with rage, he pointed directly at me and screamed, "This is all her fault! She poisoned him against his own family. She is the manipulator, not us." His outburst was captured on the court recorder and witnessed by everyone in the room. After 3 weeks of carefully documented evidence showing exactly who had been lying and manipulating his inability to take responsibility was the final proof of his character. Judge Williams, speaking in her official capacity, delivered the consequences with calm authority. Based on the evidence presented today, I am ordering the immediate restoration of all funds taken from Mr. Torres's accounts without authorization. I am also recommending that the district attorney review this case for potential criminal charges of elder abuse fraud and conspiracy. But the justice system was only the beginning of their downfall. Within days, word spread through our extended family and social community about what had happened. Cousins who had been fed lies about my character for months learned the truth and were horrified by my parents' manipulation. Family friends who had known Grandpa for decades were appalled by how he had been treated. The social consequences were swift and merciless. My parents found themselves excluded from community events they had attended for years. Their church, where they had been prominent members, quietly asked them to step back from leadership roles. Even Danny's bar, which had been a source of pride for the family, became a symbol of their corruption as word spread about how it was really funded. Isabella lost her job at the family accounting firm when her employer learned about her involvement in financial manipulation. Marco's girlfriend broke up with him after learning about his treatment of Grandpa. Vincent was passed over for a promotion at work when his boss, who knew our family, heard about the scandal. But for me, the real victory was not their punishment. It was watching Grandpa reclaim his dignity and power. Within a month of the legal proceedings, he was like a different person. The confused, manipulated elderly man my family had tried to create disappeared, replaced by the sharp, decisive patriarch I remembered from my childhood. "You know what the best part is, Sarah," he told me as we sat in his garden one afternoon watching the birds he loved so much. "I get to choose my real family now, and you are first on that list." He was right. The family that emerged from the ashes of this destruction was smaller but infinitely stronger. Aunt Caroline moved back to Boston to be closer to us, bringing with her a fierce loyalty and protective instinct that my parents had never shown. Danny, redeemed by his cooperation and genuine remorse, became like the brother I had always wanted, someone who stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Detective Santos and Rebecca Martinez, who had started as professional allies, became genuine friends who included us in their own family gatherings. Judge Williams, impressed by our fight for justice, mentored me as I prepared for law school, a dream I had never thought possible until this experience showed me how powerful legal advocacy could be. But perhaps the most meaningful addition to our chosen family was Mrs. Elena Vasquez, the elderly woman from Grandpa's neighborhood, who had been quietly checking on him during his illness. When she learned about how his biological family had treated him, she was so outraged that she appointed herself as his honorary daughter, bringing homemade meals and fierce protection against anyone who might try to take advantage of him again. 6 months later, as I graduated from nursing school with highest honors, I looked out into the audience and saw my real family cheering for me. Grandpa, radiant with pride and health that his doctors called miraculous. Aunt Caroline, who had helped pay for my education without being asked. Detective Santos and his wife, who had become surrogate parents to me. Rebecca Martinez, who was already helping me apply to law school for the following year. The people who should have been there, my parents, my siblings, had made their choice long ago. They had chosen money over love, manipulation over honesty, and cruelty over compassion. The natural consequences of those choices meant they would never be part of my life again, and I had finally made peace with that reality. But this story is not really about revenge, even though that is how it started. It is about learning that family is not determined by blood or legal documents or shared last names. It is about discovering that when people show you their true nature, you have the power to choose whether to accept their treatment or build something better. As I wrote my final nursing school essay about patient advocacy and protecting vulnerable populations, I realized that everything I had learned from fighting for Grandpa would make me a better nurse, a stronger advocate, and eventually a more effective lawyer. The money my family had tried to steal was returned with interest and penalties. The trust fund was restructured to benefit causes Grandpa truly cared about, including a scholarship fund for nursing students from working-class families. Danny's bar, which he had rebuilt with legitimate funding, became a gathering place for our chosen family and a symbol of redemption rather than corruption. Most importantly, Grandpa lived to see justice served to enjoy 3 more birthdays surrounded by people who truly loved him, and to walk me down the aisle when I married Rebecca's brother 2 years later. A man who understood that my fierce loyalty to family came from hard-won experience about what family really means. When people ask me now if I regret the pain of discovering my biological family's true nature, I tell them honestly that it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It freed me to build relationships based on genuine love, mutual respect, and shared values rather than obligation and manipulation. And when I became a nurse practitioner specializing in elder care, every patient I protected from family manipulation was a victory not just for them, but for the memory of that lonely old man sitting in front of his untouched birthday cake, teaching me that love is not about what people promise, it is about what they choose to do when no one is watching. So here is my question for all of you watching this story unfold. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what is right? Have you ever discovered that the people you trusted most were not who you thought they were? I would love to hear about your experiences with family drama and how you found the strength to stand up for what you believed in. Drop your stories in the comments below. Your courage might inspire someone else who is facing a similar situation. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope that justice can prevail even against impossible odds, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about standing up to family manipulation and finding your chosen family. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they are not alone in their fight against toxic family dynamics. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, and remember that sometimes the family that chooses you is infinitely more valuable than the family you were born into. Keep fighting for what is right. Keep protecting the people you love, and never let anyone convince you that blood relation gives them permission to treat you badly. Until next time, choose love over loyalty, truth over convenience, and remember that real family shows up when it matters most.